ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mike Spiciali. I spent 8 years in the General Assembly opposing this very bill, and for 8 years we managed to keep it at bay. For 8 years I battled it out with well, first off, let me say that there's no such thing as Convention of States. She just read Article 5. It's an Article 5 constitutional amendment. There's no such thing as, so every time you hear Convention of States, think constitutional amendment. We're doing wordplay here to try and get your mind. That's what they're trying to do, is get your mind off of thinking constitutional convention. Because a constitutional convention is a dangerous thing. It opens up your constitution. The argument, they'll give you the argument that no, it won't, it doesn't open it up, but it does, because they can take any amendments. Everything we tell you tonight, both sides, do your homework on it, check on it, look for the facts. Don't just depend on the hearsay, because some things we're just not going to have time to show you the papers or this or that. So we're going to tell you stuff, but I want to see you go home and check for yourself, okay? What is my biggest concern with the Constitutional Convention? It is a constitutional convention. It will open up. I want to start by saying that this has been going on for 240 years. Ever since the first Constitutional Convention, 1787, every 15 or 20 years there's a push for another Constitutional Convention. And it has never succeeded. And the reason it has never succeeded is because it should be a last resort when everything else has gone down the tubes and you have nothing else to do. This is what you do when you're living under a tyrannical government. Let's be honest, people. The folks that were back there in 1787, they understood tyranny because they lived under it. They understood freedom because they fought for it. Most of the folks today, it concerns me. I spent 8 years in the legislature. I love all them folks up there, but I would not trust any of them with my liberty. And don't worry, I've already told them that. When I was still up there, we discussed this very issue. This is a complicated issue, but it makes it simple when you understand that by opening this up, by opening up the Constitution, any amendments can come from it. The Convention of States folks have not been totally honest in a lot of the things that they did. They sent out a flyer to people, to my constituents, a few years ago, stating that I supported the Convention of States. From the very beginning, I have been their main opposition. So we called and we got an apology from them. I have an email, so if we're shaking our head there, I have an apology from them that they won't do it again. But the bottom line is it's all designed to take your mind off the fact that this is a constitutional convention. There are amendments already made up. There are amendments from some states. Hawaii did an amendment that would have gutted the Second Amendment. The argument initially from the Convention of States folks was that, oh, come on, do you really think that the people, because the people are going to have to vote on this, do you really think that they would vote for bad amendments? And I said, read Article 5 again, because nowhere does it give the people the right to vote on this. It goes to the state legislatures. It says it right in Article 5. Remember, look at Article 5. Does everybody here have a copy of the Constitution? Does anybody not have a copy? Okay. You don't get to vote on it. Your state legislatures do. Think about some of the bills that state legislatures have put through, both Republican and Democrat, and ask yourself if you want them deciding on your liberty, if you want them deciding on your Constitution. We here in North Carolina have made some mistakes on constitutional amendments for our state constitution. And I can give you a couple of examples, but I'll give you one. There was a constitutional amendment. Well, you know what? I'm not going to get into it because I don't have time, and that'll cut me short here. But trust me, we've had to go back on things and fix them because we didn't take it full circle. And full circle is what the folks in 1787 did. They understood the ramifications. That's why this is the longest lasting constitution in the world, because it was put together well. And it was put together, honestly, I believe this, with the hand of God guiding these people, because it's just not possible that they could have put together such a good document that lasted so long. Neither Congress nor the states has the authority to limit what goes on at that convention. You've been to conventions before. Nowhere in Article 5 does it say, it leaves a lot of information out. That's part of the problem. So a lot of this stuff is unsettled. And I want to read you a brief part because he says it better than I can. The Constitution, this is from Robert Greenstein, who was the president of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. At least he was at the time this was written. I lost my place. Sorry. The Constitution sets no rules for how a constitutional convention would work. What standards determine whether 34 states have approved it or not? You have states that approved it and then rescinded their approval. Does that count? It's not in Article 5. That means the courts are probably going to have to make a decision on that. Do all the resolutions that state legislatures have ever passed count? Again, the courts are not going to want to have to rule on this, just like they didn't want to have to rule on the elections, because it'll put them in a bad spot. So we're going to have a constitutional crisis. Oklahoma, for instance, passed a resolution in 1976 calling for a convention, but they rescinded it in 2009. Does it still count? Commission of States folks say yes, it does. Oklahoma says no, it doesn't. Who decides? If a constitution were called, how many delegates would each state get? How would they be selected? The left, the Democrats, okay, were in favor of this. They were in favor of this when they controlled 3/4 of the states. They're no longer in favor of it. They're voting against it. If you look at who voted, the Democrats all voted against this. They're not happy with it, which is a smart thing. They're afraid the Republicans are going to control it. Here's the problem. By the time they get the 3/4 of the states that they need, who will be in control of 3/4 of the states? It changes every election. We don't know that. We see what happened in Washington. Everything's controlled by Democrats. Again, bad move. How much time do I have left?
We got 4 minutes left.
No, nobody knows which party or which ideology would be in control when this thing comes to play. Look at the 17th Amendment. Look at mistakes that were made. The 17th Amendment, which changed from United States senators being appointed by the states to them being elected by the people. Those of us that understand our history and understand what happened understand that since that time, the states have had no representation in Washington. The primary purpose of the Senate was to look out for the interests of the states. And that's why the states appointed them. The legislatures appointed the senators. So it was a bad move because now you see where we're at. States have virtually no rights against the federal government that they created. That's just one. Prohibition was another. That was hastily put together. It was by lobbyists and everyone else twisting arms, and you saw what happened. The government should never, whether you agree with drinking, not drinking, doesn't matter. The government should never be in a position to tell us how to live our lives. So it was a mistake, and it ultimately ended up having to be repealed after people died from crime, and crime escalated in this country, and all kinds of things going on. Mistakes are problematic. We can't afford mistakes. We cannot afford an oops, we should have thought of that. There's been too many of those in government. Initially, the argument, when the Convention of States first started, they were going after actually everything. They had nothing. Okay, then they honed it because they weren't getting any support, so they honed it and said, let's go for a balanced budget amendment. Well, the balanced budget amendment did not resonate with enough legislators, so now they're going with term limits. Don't be fooled into the issue. Don't be fooled into not understanding what the issue is. The issue is not term limits. There's ways to get term limits. The issue is a constitutional convention the way to do it? And the answer in your minds, all of our minds, if we care about freedom, should be no. That's not the way to do it. So please don't get caught up. That's how a lot of these guys voted yes on this, because they got wrapped up in, oh yeah, I think term limits are a good idea. Well, let me ask you this. If term limits are such a good idea, where is the General Assembly's bill limiting their own terms? They want to limit Congress's, but they didn't limit their own. If it's a good idea, it should be a good idea for everybody. I thank you for your time. If I have any time left, I'm going to yield it because I think I said everything that I had to say.